Greetings, everyone. Here are the main points of the video. Russia's energy is paralyzed, Moscow faces disaster, and there's a historic fuel shortage. Because key oil refineries have been simultaneously destroyed, production has plummeted to its lowest point in more than 2 decades. A devastating cascading crisis is directly choking every transportation artery within Russia. Thousands of Russian drivers are fleeing at night as tolls rise, and 59 checkpoints try to stop them. The desperate search for gasoline has led to a surge in fuel tourism, causing non-stop border traffic jams and rising tensions. Security forces are involved, and the black market is thriving. National reserves, gas station lines, and rationing policies emerging. Fuel rationing based on odd and even license plates and the record price exceeding $200 per liter on the black market reveal the extent of civil unrest. Welcome to the program on running through tank barricades, even when checkpoints are set up to stop you. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue. Thank you, dear viewers. Chaos, disaster, the biggest fuel crisis in 21 years under Putin. Ladies and gentlemen, crossing the borders and roads of the Russian Federation at this time, you can feel the impact of the biggest fuel crisis in 21 years under Putin. What greets travelers is not the vast magnificence of a great nation, but a widespread fuel crisis that is choking every traffic artery. Signs reading "no gasoline" used to be rare, but now they are everywhere, with increasing difficulties and strict controls being put in place to prevent the situation from worsening. It's a bitter reality for thousands of Russian drivers, exposing the weaknesses in the infrastructure of a country once considered a global energy superpower. Russia under President Vladimir Putin appears like a fortress, gradually closing its doors to the outside world. The statistics at the checkpoint in 2026 show signs of restriction.
Chặt cánh cửa với thế giới bên ngoài. Con số thống kê trong
The number of Russian drivers only reached about 2.99 million trips. This is a sharp decrease of about 20% compared to the same period last year and marks the lowest point since overnight, with more checkpoints successfully restricting movement. The terrifying fuel shortage is spreading across Russia's vast expanse, completely freezing all logistics supply chains and turning what used to be a bustling summer travel season into a luxury of the past. The regulations prolonging the protracted war in Ukraine by the Kremlin have turned this vast territory into a dangerous land that no international traveler wants to set foot in anymore. Thousands of Russians are fleeing through the night, desperately searching for a safe escape route. However, once they cross the border, transit checkpoints stop them, subjecting them to a major shock and strict control measures. Thus, from Europe, Central Asia, or the Caucasus region, thousands of Russians are forced to flee through the night.
Trên khác, những cây xăng hoang vắng, những hàng xe nối đuôi nhau chờ đợi hàng giờ đồng hồ.
They set up 59 checkpoints with heightened security.
Chưa dừng lại ở đó,
Thousands of Russian drivers, in order to prevent enemy UAV attacks, have continuously jammed GPS signals over a wide area. As a result, navigation devices are completely disabled. Smart maps and automatic positioning are off by kilometers, turning ordinary trips into a deadly survival trap on the highways. Traveling through the night, logistics are severely disrupted, with checkpoints and strict controls set up everywhere to block movement. This has caused them to lose even the most basic ability to move around within their own domestic routes. The fuel crisis inside Russia is no longer just an inconvenience or a nuisance, but has turned into a strategic military vulnerability, paralyzing everyday life. The root cause that sparked this crisis began in May 2026, when the Ukrainian military launched precision strike operations with thousands
ngọn lửa khủng hoảng này bắt đầu từ tháng 5 năm 2020
of drones against a series of key oil refineries deep inside Russian territory. When production capacity was severely damaged right at the time when fuel consumption demand peaked in the summer, the collapse was inevitable. Endless lines of cars slowly formed in front of gas stations throughout the night, stretching on. With fuel demand peaking in the summer, a cascading collapse was unavoidable. Russia had to impose extremely strict austerity policies by limiting gasoline. Even storing fuel in extra tanks or plastic containers, which used to be a lifesaver for long trips, was strictly prohibited. During those overnight runs, gas stations were completely closed to civilians, with all supplies reserved for the military security forces, and emergency vehicles. Official economic indicators from the National Statistics Agency, Rosstat, have laid bare the severity of the disaster. Thousands of Russian drivers have increased by about 14% since the overnight runs and the establishment of checkpoints. Thousands of vehicles were stopped overnight as military presence and checkpoints increased.
Công bố, tình hình căng thẳng tại các cây xăng leo thang đến mức Bộ Nội vụ và lực lượng vệ
Checkpoints were set up, riots and fights broke out. Police in both the East and West cracked down on black marketeers who hoarded gasoline and sold it at inflated prices amid public chaos. On the strategic M4 highway leading to the Black Sea through the Krasnodar region, thousands of drivers were only allowed to fill up a maximum of 30 liters of gasoline. Similar restrictions were also imposed at southern transit points like Rostov province and the Stavropol region. What's even more concerning is in places like Irkutsk and the Zabaykalsky region, where the distance between refueling points can reach hundreds of kilometers. A checkpoint where people line up just to exchange for a few liters of gasoline has become a bitter tragedy. In Irkutsk, Mr. Ruslan Bolotov had to install mobile toilets along the highways.
Đến mức thị trưởng Irkutsk, ông Ruslan Bolotov, đã phải cho lắp đặt các nhà vệ sinh vi động dọc theo các lối ra xa lộ gần trạm xăng để phục vụ nhu cầu tối thiểu của người dân.
Checkpoints were established to stop it. Thousands of Russians ironically struggle to survive due to infrastructure issues. In many major cities, underground networks now deliver overpriced gasoline to homes. People often drive through the night if they can afford it to escape the hopeless lines. Local authorities in provinces like Tabo and Khost impose strict gasoline rationing by odd and even license plate numbers due to the situation getting out of control. A95 gasoline prices have soared on the black market, leading authorities to restrict fuel distribution by alternating odd and even license plate numbers each day. For the first time in history, it exceeded 200 a liter. The dire situation in Crimea does not stop at the communication blackout. When internet service providers are not on the infrastructure list, they are vulnerable and have their diesel supply for generators cut off. Thousands of drivers had to drive through the night. And for a foreign tourist, driving a car in Crimea at this time is like playing a dangerous game of Russian roulette. Even if you find gasoline, paying for it is another obstacle under the weight of sanctions and checkpoints, blocking the use of foreign credit cards. If you don't have cash or a local debit card, buying a liter of gasoline becomes impossible for international drivers, as foreign credit cards are rendered useless. Without cash or a local debit card, buying a liter of gasoline also becomes impossible. It has triggered an unprecedented wave of cross-border fuel-seeking migration in modern history. Russian people have started pouring into border areas adjacent to both Kazakhstan and Belarus, creating a bitter phenomenon of fuel tourism. Endless lines of cars follow each other across the border into Kazakhstan, painting a chaotic and bitter picture. Cars form endless lines across the Russian and Belarusian borders for fuel. Footage captured the chaos at these border regions. The most intense asymmetric tensions erupted at the southern border with Kazakhstan. Thousands of Russian drivers crossed into Kazakhstan, sparking angry reactions from local Kazakh residents on social media. To protect national reserves, the Astana government immediately took decisive action.
Trên mạng xã hội,
To protect national reserves, the Astana government immediately took decisive action. Mobile police checkpoints operated 24/7 on border routes, with rules allowing each vehicle to cross only once per day. Very strict mechanical inspections were implemented to find hidden compartments and modified auxiliary tanks under vehicles. These cat-and-mouse chases made border procedures last for hours, paralyzing commercial transport between the two countries. Just between July 2nd and July 4th, thousands of Russian drivers spent the night, and Kazakhstan's export ban on gasoline and oil by both road and rail was extended until May 2027. As a result, due to the tightening measures of the neighboring country, control and prevention have been enforced.
năm 2027. Hệ quả từ các
Russian drivers had to flee, and once again, Russian drivers ran into the wall of scarcity with a strict 40-liter quota at the Astrakhan crossing. Russian drivers once again crashed into the checkpoint, which has turned into a regional security and economic disaster. The high price for the determination not to give up the war, along with increasingly precise Ukrainian attacks, has imposed restrictions. directly devastated the Russian tourism industry. In the first 6 months of 2026, the number of international tourists directly devastated the Russian tourism industry in the first 6 months of 2020. International tourists to Russia have dropped by 19.6%, reaching the lowest level in the past 5 years. Right in the peak of summer, there was a sudden downturn at night, and the severe congestion erased the Russian Federation from the travel map. In a ruthless way, the once bustling seaside resort paradises along the Black Sea like Sochi or Anapa, which used to be packed with tourists every summer, now face a bleak future like cities where all main roads have been cut off. Along the main M4 highway, hundreds of roadside motels and traditional Russian restaurants that used to survive, thanks to the steady flow of passing tourists, are now being hit by a chain reaction and are filing for bankruptcy one after another. It's not just the flow of tourists passing through that has been cut off, but also checkpoints have been set up to prevent movement. This chain of destruction continues, and businesses are filing for bankruptcy one after another. Not only international tourists, but thousands of Russians are also hit hard by the crisis. In June, hotel bookings nationwide fell 16%. When broken down by region, the overall picture becomes even gloomier. Moscow's tourism industry saw a 15% drop, Krasnodarskoye saw a 25% decrease, while Rostov province suffered losses of up to 30%. Travel agencies are caught in a dilemma, with no other options left to control or prevent the situation.
Tổn thất lên tới 30%.
Travel agencies are caught in a dilemma, with no choice but to cancel a series of summer tour packages already sold to people because airfares have skyrocketed. Even more bitter on the Kim Peninsula, the disaster's epicenter, road transportation is the lifeline. Driving through the night and soaring prices are a stark summary of this economic collapse. This is not a temporary fluctuation, but a manifestation of a structural crisis, with signs that it will continue to drag on. The reason this crisis has no way out is because of the infrastructure collapse. Thousands of Russian drivers have become targets of systematic destruction, from Ukraine's drone attacks reaching deep into the rear. According to international analyses, about 20% to 45% of Russia's total rated processing capacity has been disabled overnight after a series of attacks. The risk is rising, and many checkpoints have been neutralized to prevent further incidents. Every day, thousands of Russians flee overnight, and the Moscow region has had to increase defenses and set up processing stations. Just as severe, the Kapornia refinery, which supplies most of the fuel needs for the capital, is expected to be shut down for at least 6 months, possibly extending into 2027. The extent of the damage at the Kiwisi oil refinery, which accounts for up to 6% of the country's total output, with a capacity of 415,000 barrels per day, reveals a reality that this goes far beyond ordinary breakdowns. The Ukrainian military's precision strikes hit the core hydrocracking system. Only high-risk, highly complex, round-the-clock work can restore it. These heavy losses have become impossible to fix as Western technology embargoes make repairs impossible. The giant towers from the Soviet era and the Western-sourced components have extended the repair time from a few weeks to several months. Even Western financial resources have extended the repair time from a few weeks. Russia is deeply affected by this. When the tension rises, control and blockades are put in place. For Russian drivers, operating internal combustion engine vehicles has become a nightmare, creating a fundamental shift in consumer behavior, leading to overnight fuel runs and the establishment of 59-strong blockades. Statistics from the Veto Start Analysis Agency show that electric and hybrid car sales have unexpectedly surged in Russia from June to mid-July. The long lines of cars running overnight, with the number of electric and hybrid vehicles unexpectedly soaring by 80%, and the charging stations operated by the National Nuclear Energy Corporation, Rosatom, have become the most vivid evidence of people fleeing dependence on fuel. Overall, the fuel crisis has tightened and manipulated the entire transportation system, becoming the most vivid evidence of people fleeing dependence on fuel. The fate of the country, a nation that was once an energy export giant, now thousands of Russian drivers are fleeing at night, buying fuel at soaring prices, facing a complete collapse. The deep disruption in the supply chain proves that the cost of controlling the front line has directly spilled over into and devastated the lives of thousands of Russian drivers and has directly impacted Russian civilian life. This is the steep cost of strategic blindness in a drawn-out war. How long can a country whose logistical arteries have been cut off to this extent continue to hold out and sustain a prolonged war using only its internal resources? The helplessness of the crowds trying to stop it. Thousands of high-altitude flights.
Cùng những biến động rạn nứt từ mặt trận, liệu chính quyền Moscow sẽ làm được?
Blocked by checkpoints.